Tales of the Jedi, a collection of short stories that deal with different moments in the lives of Jedi in the prequel trilogy, is no doubt a welcomed addition in the Star Wars animated space, building up on the legacy of the Clone Wars and going more in depth on some of the characters who benefited the most from that series. Made up of 6 episodes, they're split into 2 paths. The first following Ahsoka Tano across various points in her life, and the other depicting a young Count Dooku before his fall to the dark side of the Force. Episode 1, Life and Death, starts this series off with the birth of baby Ahsoka on her home planet of Shili. It's also here that we meet her mother and father, Pav T and Nakil. The whole idea behind this episode is for Ahsoka to learn to respect life and face death, all while having a narrative process where her village discovers that she's Force sensitive. For the most part, it did start out promising, and I figured once after her birth, we'd get a short time jump to seeing Ahsoka as a kid. You know, right before she gets taken by Plo Koon. But to my surprise, we didn't get that at all. Instead, Ahsoka is a baby throughout the entire episode for really no purpose but to be cute, I guess. To add to this episode is extremely predictable and made little sense. Why Pav T thought it was a good idea for her only a year after giving birth to go off into the wilderness with a baby and to hunt? All while her perfectly abled husband stayed behind was just asking for trouble to happen. Yeah, I get what Pav T thought she was trying to do, I suppose, but taking a 1-year-old on a hunting trip and trying to explain the meaning of life to a baby, who in all honesty doesn't even understand or know what's going on, well, it just doesn't seem too smart now that I'm saying all of this out loud, does it? Eventually, the two get attacked by a wild space saber-toothed tiger, and it was at this point where my suspension of disbelief just called it quits. Let's be real, this creature would have killed a lone woman who did nothing but spend the last year caring for a baby she gave birth to, not even allowing the rest of the villagers to get there in time to save her, and the baby? Yeah, the saber-toothed tiger would have killed its prey long before Ahsoka's cuteness would be able to rub off on it and have her Force powers triggered to control the beast. I mean, just grabbing Ahsoka, it would have killed her right there and then. But yeah, I also found it unbelievable how the whole time Pav T did not even shed a tear or really look devastated that she lost her child to a wild beast. It's almost like she didn't really care all that much, and then again, we already went over on why she's not exactly the smartest or best parent of the year material. And then when she did get Ahsoka, it was just like, oh, okay, I guess she's back now. Overall, I wasn't a fan of this episode at all. In fact, I thought it was dumb and awful. While sure, it looked and sounded amazing, especially the lighting here alone, everything else did not make sense and was, again, very predictable, with the exception of the stupidity of Pav T or forcing a 1-year-old baby Ahsoka as being the second coming of Space Jesus. That I did not see coming, and I'm glad I didn't because, again, that was just oof. I'd much rather have had a kid Ahsoka based episode where she gets lost from her village while playing in the woods and something similar with a wild beast happens instead, rather than whatever this was. So unfortunately, this is definitely not a good start to Tales of the Jedi at all, at least for me. We now switch over to a Count Dooku-centric story where he and a young Padawan, Qui-Gon Jinn, are dispatched by the Council to a distant planet to try and resolve a hostage situation. And let me just say, whoa, what a change in quality. After a very disappointing and boring first episode, this one was quite good, and I liked it that it had a twist to it as well. Because as it turns out, the hostage is really a senator's son who was kidnapped by desperate poor villagers who feel that they were mistreated by the senator Dagonet. And the son himself even agrees and has really no issues being kidnapped because he understands their plight. Then to add another twist on top of it, it turns out Dagonet arrives with his army and wants to kill the entire village in order to make an example of them for kidnapping his son. Which was, for an animated show, pretty dark. So yeah, the villagers weren't kidding around. This guy really is a dirtbag after all. The whole situation then ends up getting really under Dooku's skin, to the point where he lets the dark side take over and nearly kills the senator with a force choke. But Qui-Gon Jinn realizes what's happening and frees the senator's son in order to save Dagonet. For a short episode, this one was rather enjoyable. It had some mystery, twists, action, and emotion, all while giving us our very first glimpse of Dooku and Qui-Gon's relationship as master and apprentice, which was so cool to see. While Dooku is a wise old Jedi, he's already letting his emotions get the best of him, and needs a calm and composed Qui-Gon to keep him leveled. Also, judging by Qui-Gon's reaction to Dooku's force choke, I've got a feeling this wasn't the first time young Qui-Gon witnessed his master tap into the dark side. Yet, he doesn't really seem to have any real issue with it. He seems to think that it's a normal reaction, I suppose, and hey, as long as there's no casualties, then he probably doesn't make a mention of it to the council either. Obviously, this is an unorthodox move for a Jedi to do, but hey, that's Qui-Gon in a nutshell. Episode 3, Choices. This time we see Dooku and Mace Windu travel on a mission to Raxus Secundus to solve a murder mystery regarding another Jedi. The difference between Mace and Qui-Gon serving as Dooku's partner in an episode is pretty stark, as Mace keeps wanting to stick to the rules, the Republic, and the Jedi Protocol, and is constantly either questioning or challenging Dooku's ideas. Unlike Qui-Gon, who's more passive and lets Dooku do his thing without really questioning any of it. So I did really like how we had this episode right after the one before, so we can really see the stark contrast between these two and when working alongside Dooku. Now, I will say the murder mystery aspect of this episode wasn't really anything to write home about. It was somewhat predictable, especially with everyone acting sketchy on Raxus and Senator Larek's poor acting really giving it away. That was probably intentional, but yeah. Thankfully, I was glad to see that both Dooku and Mace saw through all of this and didn't really need to do much investigating before getting right to the bottom of things. And as it turns out, it was the guards the whole time who were against their greedy and exploitive senator and saw the Jedi as merely corrupt tools of the Republic. It's throughout here that we see more and more of Dooku wanting to do things his own way, which no doubt annoys Mace, and even at one point seeing Dooku almost admit to one of the guards behind the murder that he was somewhat right in his views. Which, even surprised the guard. Now, while here we don't necessarily see Dooku's dark side really pop off like before, we instead see his rebellious and jaded side of the Jedi and the Republic's ways. And well, him learning at the end that Mace was rewarded with a seat on the council over him, who, despite again not following protocol and as a result seeing Raxus' senator get killed, did however solve the murder mystery because of his choices, not Mace's. Yet he's the one who gets overlooked, and well, you can just tell Dooku is not impressed by this and feels it's an unfair decision by the Jedi Council. And this is the thing about this episode, it's really less about the murder mystery and more so showing us how much Dooku did not fit in being a Jedi, both through his contrasting ideology and dissatisfaction with the Jedi as he inches further and further away to the dark side. Plus, it's probably no coincidence that this took place on Raxus, which later turns out to be the capital city of the CIS. So it goes without saying that the events here had to have some weight in having later decided that. Not my favorite Dooku episode out of the bunch, but a darn good one nonetheless. Episode 4, The Sith Lord. And here we have it. After showing us the why, we now get the how in Dooku's turn to the dark side, and it's honestly one of the best, if not the best thing to come out from this series. Here we first start off with seeing Dooku go to the Jedi archives to wipe out all of the evidence concerning Sifo Dyas, Kamino, and the Clone Army, which perfectly answers the question from the prequels on why none of this information was available to the Jedi before, and when exactly Dooku removed it all. Another great thing about this episode is the inclusion of Qui-Gon Jinn and Yaddle, as well Dooku's interaction with his former Padawan. Honestly, I could watch a whole series of just these two going on adventures together and love every second of it. But Qui-Gon is more so a cameo here, as Yaddle plays a much larger role in the story. As after a short time jump, she begins to grow suspicious of Dooku, especially after he later decides not to go to Qui-Gon's funeral and begins to follow him to see what turns out to be a secret meeting with Darth Sidious. I found it absolutely fascinating here that Dooku was angry with Sidious over the slaying of Qui-Gon by Maul, claiming that he believes that Qui-Gon could have become a powerful ally for the Sith. And wow, just trying to imagine a world where Qui-Gon survives Maul and becomes a Dark Jedi or even Sith himself would have been wild. But apparently that's what Dooku saw, or at least wanted to see to happen. Yaddle ends up crashing the party and has Dooku choose sides, either join her, the light side, and bring Sidious in, or give in to his anger for the Jedi corruption and have the dark side consume him. Dooku of course chooses the dark side, and we get our first and only serious lightsaber duel in this series. For what it is, it's pretty good, but of course we're going to be picking up a lot of similarities here between Dooku's duel with Yoda in Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. It's during this fight that we hear Yaddle also tell Dooku that she gave up her seat on the council after agreeing with him that yeah, there's plenty wrong with the Jedi Order. And while I'm sure Dooku deep down inside was glad to hear it, he knew he couldn't let Yaddle out of there alive, eventually having to kill her. Well, not quite. Because as it turns out, she ends up somehow surviving Dooku's first attempt, only to have another short exchange with him again and then finally being dealt the finishing blow with his lightsaber. Personally, I wasn't a fan of this short little sequence as it really seemed unnecessary, and I felt Yaddle's first presumed death, being crushed by the gate, was much more powerful. Aside from that, I also wasn't a fan of the decision to have Yaddle speak normally, I guess, rather than having her sound like Yoda. Don't get me wrong, Bryce Dallas Howard did an excellent job in voicing her, but for me, it's more of a personal preference to have the Yoda species all speak the same, so that part kinda disappointed me. But other than those two small little nitpicks, this episode rocked and gave me everything I wanted to see about Dooku from this timeline. Episode 5, Practice Makes Perfect. So this one I think is the shortest episode of the entire series, and yeah, it makes sense, as there really isn't much happening here other than Anakin giving Ahsoka a much harder test to prove herself to him, as according to Anakin, the test that the Jedi gave her was just far too easy. And yeah, it's a decently well-made episode, mainly as we do get to see more familiar faces here in Anakin, Obi-Wan, Rex, and the clones, which was nice. As well, I really like the little time jumps here showing that even though Ahsoka gets older and we get deeper into the Clone Wars, she's still very much working hard on this test and is unable to master it. In a way, you could almost see this as Anakin training Ahsoka to be prepared for Order 66. And I feel this would be more powerful had he known about Order 66, which obviously he didn't. So this is more of a coincidence than anything else. Still, it does help to show Ahsoka's effectiveness against the troopers, as she, thanks to Anakin, was trained against them unlike all the other Jedi. The one single nitpick I did have here is the forced-in fan service of having Depa Billaba and Kanan watching Ahsoka's Jedi test. Really for no reason other than for folks to have a Leo DiCaprio pointing at the screen meme moment. I mean, I'd be okay with it if there were a bunch of other Jedi or Padawans in the stands watching her do her test, and Kanan just happened to be one of the many there that watched her. Then sure, but yeah, come on. Anakin and a bunch of Jedi Council masters watching her test, that part makes sense. But then for some reason, no one else being there but for Depa Billaba and Kanan to just be in an empty gym really made me roll my eyes. We really did not need Kanan seeing Ahsoka before Rebels, but whatever. Episode 6, Resolve. Well, alright, finally a really good Ahsoka-based episode and a fantastic way to end Tales of the Jedi. We get a direct continuation from the Clone Wars Season 7 finale with Ahsoka stopping by on Naboo with Rex in order to attend Padme's funeral. Bail Organa spots Ahsoka in the crowd and the two have a quick chat before a clone patrol cuts it short. But the idea was for Bail to give Ahsoka a comlink so that she could get in touch with him in the future. And well, I thought this whole scene was executed real well. Especially the comedic moment where he's talking to Ahsoka but not really, and the troopers think he's talking to them, and then they're just kinda weirded out about it, but they're not really asking any questions. They just kinda go with the flow. Then sometime later, Ahsoka touches down on a remote farm planet and adopts a new name, Ashla, and tries to live her best normal, honest life. Unfortunately, when Ahsoka uses her Force powers to stop some hay bales from falling on a worker, her secret is then outed. And one of the workers lets the Empire know where Ahsoka is hiding. News of this spreads, and then when Ahsoka returns to the village, she finds the place burned down to a crisp, courtesy of an Inquisitor who's there to find her. Ahsoka then even protects the villager who outed her to the Empire and manages to stop the Inquisitor in his tracks, with almost little to no effort at all, really showing just how powerful she is despite not even being armed with a lightsaber. Knowing that more will follow, Ahsoka tells the villagers that they're now going to have to leave the planet. She then decides to use the comlink that Bail gave to her to summon him and help give the villagers a new home, which I would assume to be Alderaan, and well, it's safe to say all Ahsoka did was really only delay their deaths, but hey, it's the thought that counts, right? Anyway, it's here when Bail asks Ahsoka if she's decided to get back into the fight, of which she agrees after seeing the harm that the Empire has done. Now, aside from the several canon retcons here from the Ahsoka novel, I really ended up enjoying this episode a lot. We get plenty here, and aside from the retcons, which I'll never like, everything else was done relatively well. The Inquisitor, which is no longer, I think, the sixth brother, but someone brand new, looked and sounded insanely cool. And the story itself, which already was good from the novel, of course continues to be just as strong despite certain smaller details having been changed. Overall, another really good episode and definitely the best Ahsoka one out of the series by far. And as a series whole, Tales of the Jedi was a fun time and no doubt felt nostalgic thanks to the Clone Wars animation style, all while filling in some blanks and adding some more lore to the canon, which is never a bad thing. Yeah, I'm a bit disappointed that these episodes were so short and the few that we did get here were only focused on two characters, Ahsoka and Dooku. Which, sure, I still liked it a lot, but I kind of was expecting this to be an anthology series featuring a different Jedi and their story for each episode. After all, it's called Tales of the Jedi, not Tales of Ahsoka and Dooku. Regardless, I did have a good time with what we did get, and out of all of them, episodes 2, 3, 4, and 6 were my favorites out of the bunch. And it's really no secret that I loved seeing Dooku's descent to the dark side, as while he saw flaws in the Jedi like Ahsoka did, both of them took completely different paths about it, each of course thinking theirs was the right one. Now, I have to say, after this, I wouldn't mind another season of this series, but hopefully going with my idea and this time focusing on other Jedi like Plo Koon, Kit Fisto, Shaak Ti, and so on. Or heck, a Tales of the Sith would also be pretty sweet to see too.